Why people suffer. There is suffering caused by physical pain, and then there is the kind as a result of psychological trauma. It is critical to be aware that humans are not emotionally disturbed by the events of our lives, but rather we have emotional reactions to events because we have conditioned ourselves to respond to certain circumstances in particular emotional ways. We hold a great deal of control over our emotional states, and can detach ourselves from them when our brain tries to take us into an emotional state that is not to our advantage. But this detachment is not the same as utter removal of emotions. We still feel the emotions, but choose to compartmentalize them so that they do not dictate our behavior but instead only help inform the choices we make as just another piece of information. This is a process that is instinctive to humans and allowed our ancestors to endure life in a harsh wilderness environment. Now, there is a popular belief about suffering that comes from Buddhism which involves something they call the Four Noble Truths, which is designed to teach people to completely detach from any kind of suffering, and that suffering is always something a person can control. Yet this is nonsense. The key problem with the Buddhist interpretation of suffering is that no amount of mental control will allow you to ignore physical pain if your body is functioning correctly. This is a scientific fact. The only way you can totally ignore all kinds of physical pain is with extreme nerve damage or the use of drugs that block signal communication in your nervous system. Furthermore, pain exists in the human body because it benefits our survival. If we did not feel pain at all, we would not then fear negative consequences for our own behavior. Pain is an important process for humans and an adaptation that has value for our survival. Our personalities are tied to our memories, which is problematic because our memories are not a perfect record of events as they objectively happen, but rather our memories are a recording of how we understood events to be. Our memories are therefore very strongly tied to the emotions we felt, and we often have difficulty remembering things long-term that are not tied to strong emotions. The benefit of knowing this is that if we can change our emotional perception of an event, we can change parts of our personalities that were shaped by those events. Furthermore, we can use our knowledge of how emotions tie into memories and personality by deciding some events are not important to base further decisions around or on, thereby causing the emotional parts of our brain to lose control over much of our decision-making process. This makes critical thinking easier to do. Suffering in relation to others. Some emotional suffering is the result of relationship problems. You can avoid experiencing jealous rage and dangerous obsessions with others by training yourself to let go of things that you fear to lose, such as your relationships with others. If you do not fear losing a relationship, then you will not respond with intense emotional reactions when faced with the prospect of losing them. You should also not entangle your personal identity entirely in a relationship you have with a specific career, person or group. There should always be a safe distance between the core aspects of your identity and your associations with others. It is the sudden loss of self that causes the mental anguish, and the mind's inability to reconcile the contradiction with the pain is what leads to rage. You should meditate on this. It is not necessary to abandon your valuable friends and lovers to practice letting go. You can practice constructively by first learning to let go of negative habits you possess, toxic individuals in your life, and hateful groups you may belong to. These things will be just as difficult to learn to let go of, and when you must say goodbye to a relationship due to change in rapport or even death, you will be able to let go with dignity and grace rather than succumb to the depravity of tortured obsession and rage. Learning to let go of unnecessary emotional attachments is not easy. It certainly did not come easy for me. I went through much anguish before I learned how to do it, and even after, I still sometimes became too attached to a person so that when they betrayed me or the relationship ended, I felt too much anger. This is part of the human condition. The important thing is to learn to purge unnecessary emotional attachments, and eventually be able to let them go. Now there are some people who form a belief that there is great merit in suffering. They believe there is so much merit that one should purposely inflict suffering on yourself or allow the suffering of others. These beliefs typically stem from magical thinking. For example, Christians who wish to reenact the suffering of Jesus when he was tortured by his executioners. This of course is nonsense, and it leads to sadism or masochism depending on whether the individual inflicts suffering on themselves or enjoys watching the suffering of others. There is more than enough suffering in the world that we do not need to purposely create it. While artificial hardships are necessary for a person to learn how to overcome challenges, such as with military field exercises, these situations are not the creation of suffering for the sole purpose of experiencing suffering. The purpose of these artificial hardships is to instruct a person in how to overcome challenges and therefore reduce future suffering through reduction of mistakes made in war.